Hey guys, it's Bald Summer, and I'm here to tell you that this one is in order of how I recorded these. This is the next one to come out, but this one isn't a PEGCAST. It's a recording of a podcast that I submitted as an assignment in college. So at Oxy, I took Canine Cognition, and in that class, we had to make something that explained the unit we were talking about. There's this one, and then there's one more. I don't want to record a preface for the one before. It's Bald Summer. Also, when you get to the PEGCAST episode in the future where I say that, you'll know that that's when I'm recording this. And I put it off for a long time. But this is the Canine Cognition podcast for Unit 1. And then there's a second one. That one I deleted because I put in no effort, and it wasn't good, and it didn't make sense. But I got an A, so he liked it. And there's a third one, and that one will come out when it's ready, and there won't be a video before it, like I said a second ago. Okay, enjoy. Hello, welcome to my podcast on canine cognition, or the thinking of dogs. This episode is going to be characterized by a proverb that maybe you've heard before. It goes, "Show me who your friends are, and I will tell you who you are." So, in order to find out about humans, we're going to have to examine their closest friends, and who's man's best friend? Of course, it's dogs. So, really what we're trying to understand here is how evolutionarily humans are so different from other primates that they're very close to in their evolutionary history. So why are humans so much better at doing so many things like communicating and creating infrastructure and things like that than chimpanzees, for example? And it turns out that you can kind of learn a lot of how humans have changed compared to their ancestors from examining how dogs have evolved to be different from their ancestors. The kind of working theory right now is that it's because of a drive for prosociality. And what that means is humans are driven to interact with and support each other and act in ways that promote being social, right? So chimpanzees will compete over things, but humans will pretty naturally look out for one another and try to aid each other. And it turns out that you see that same kind of thing in dogs where, they actively, even as young puppies, kind of seek out interaction with humans. And the reason for that is, at least according to a lot of the people that are at the forefront of the research on dogs and the way that they think, it's because of a hypothesis called self-domestication. And self-domestication essentially says that dogs were interested in kind of the benefits that they could get from associating with humans. And what that means is, so humans would, and we're talking about like very, very long ago. We're talking about like humans who are going and hunting and gathering food, right? At the very beginning of them creating civilizations, and creating like civilizations where they would sit down and stay there and begin to farm. Dogs would find that by associating with these humans and staying near these places, they would be able to essentially reap the benefits, and they would be able to share food with certain humans and grow to develop these bonds with them in that sort of way. And that means that there's an evolutionary pressure, which means that certain dogs will survive and certain dogs will die, right? It's survival of the fittest. And the fittest are the dogs that are most willing to interact with humans so that they can gain those resources. So in order to see if this hypothesis is really true, people have decided to run studies where they examine if dogs and wolves are actually different in different social contexts with humans. And the reason they do that is because if dogs underwent this self-domestication hypothesis, then you would assume that they are better at communicating with humans in some way, right? And it turns out that according to Hare's 2002 study, that's exactly what you see. So Hare did this study where dogs, puppies, and wolves were all tested on whether they would understand human gestures. And they had to understand these gestures to get food. And they want the food, so they're trying to understand the gestures. So dogs, they did great. Puppies, they did great. Wolves, they did not do as good as dogs and puppies. And what we can kind of understand from that is, dogs doing better than wolves, maybe that's because dogs are more accustomed to interacting with humans than wolves are, right? But having puppies there kind of removes that aspect. Because puppies, they're not accustomed to interacting with anything. They're babies. They don't know anything. But if they're able to understand these gestures from humans at a better level than wolves do, that suggests that there's something kind of innate, right? Something that maybe they evolved over the course of just generally long history that allows them to communicate with humans. So to kind of back up this study and see if there was more to it, Michelossi also did a test in 2003 where dogs and wolves were basically tasked with opening a box that they weren't going to be able to open. It's called the unsolvable task. They're just unable to open this box. And the test was to see if they'll ask for help. So will a dog turn around and look at a human and say, dude, help me, I can't open this box? Will a wolf do it? If, again, self-domestication hypothesis is correct, then we'll see that dogs will turn around and look at humans more than wolves do. And if it's not correct, like dogs don't have an evolutionary advantage that makes them better at communicating with humans, then you would expect to see that dogs don't do better than wolves. So the dogs did better than wolves, of course, because they have this evolutionary advantage because they have associated with humans for so long. And that's what differentiated them from different species in their past. So this is similar to what we think is happening with humans, right? We think humans are actively socializing with one another and choosing to support one another more often than other species like chimpanzees. And this sort of blossoms into this evolutionary capacity that can be grown on. And that capacity leads to a lot of different structures for things like language to be built, things like giant structures to be built, just there's a lot of infrastructure that can eventually be created if that prosociality from the self-domestication hypothesis is intact. And then so one last study that also was found to show that dogs have this evolutionary advantage was done by Nagasawa in 2015. And this was a huge study. You may have heard of it. It's very like popular, but it's okay if you haven't heard of it. They found essentially that when a dog and a human make eye contact, oxytocin is released in the brain. And that sounds like a big scary word, but really it just means that the chemical that produces love and friendship and connectedness is released in the brain when humans and dogs make eye contact. It's released in the brain of the dog and released in the brain of the human. Now, I bet you can guess what I'm going to say next. What do you think happened in wolves? That's right, the wolves did not have this same thing happen. When dogs look into humans' eyes, there's a ton of this good chemical. When wolves look into humans' eyes, the wolf does not have the chemical. The human does not have the chemical. The same effect is absolutely not found. So again, it seems like even here where it's a chemical difference in the brain of the dog compared to the wolf, there's an innate difference that causes this ability to socialize with humans. And so, this is pretty interesting evidence. It shows that just socializing, we assume, over history can eventually, through survival of the fittest, lead to a species of animal being just naturally better at communicating. And that difference is thought to be, by many professionals, something that could have driven humans to differentiate themselves from chimpanzees and other apes in the past. And that's what makes humans so different, and we've learned about it from man's best friend. So thank you for joining me on this little podcast. I hope that you understand everything that I'm talking about, and I hope that now when you look at your dog in the eyes, you'll know that they're evolutionarily wired to like you a little bit more. Have a good one. Bye-bye.